Welcome to the Engaging Personalities Podcast. I'm Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, where we're on a mission to rehumanize business through engagement. We believe that we can all be more successful if we can command attention and deepen connection. So stick around to the end of the show and we'll reveal how you can be our next guest on a future episode. So let's get ready to engage. Paul Bramson is a trainer and speaker who leaves his audiences empowered, energized, and ready to rethink how they connect with others, both professionally and personally. His company works with Fortune 500 and 1,000 organizations such as Verizon, Thomson Reuters, and KPMG. Now, Paul is considered a global authority and thought leader in the area of sales, leadership, communication, interviewing, and negotiation skills. Paul's natural effectiveness to reach his audiences comes from his sincerity and tremendous passion he has for the messages he delivers and the audiences that he works with. Here to discuss what it means to be a true pro, I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Paul Bramson. Paul, welcome.
Anders, it's good to see you.
Yes, thanks for being here. I appreciate it. Sure. Paul, let's start with this pro concept, because all of your trainings and your keynotes, it's like a pro at the end, right? All of, the different expertise you have.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a pro in your opinion?
Do you have 3 hours, Andrew?
We got half an hour.
You're on Winnipeg time. Of course you got 3 hours. All right. So have you ever watched somebody and you thought to yourself, oh, it's an amateur hour. This is amateur hour.
Yeah. Gong show. Yeah.
Gong show would be even worse, in my opinion. I thought to myself, let's come up with programs to help elevate. So when people are in front of people, whether it's sales, leadership, whether you're customer success for that matter, we want what it means to be a pro is, do you have a skill set that is refined and honed so you can engage people from, I'll just use a communication perspective, whatever your craft is, and how in either way that you have to communicate. If you're doing that in a refined, honed, polished way, to me, you're coming across as a pro. And that's the things that we're focusing on when you talk about sales and leadership training and communication training. We're trying to elevate to a point where somebody says, that's not a waste of my time. This person has done this before. It's not amateur hour. I'll use your phrase. It isn't the gong show. For your audience that's even old enough to remember that.
So, there's something you said about being a pro there in that sales piece. Like, there's something about being in good hands, right? Yeah. When you are, and I'm the same way, and I think maybe you are too, in the sense when you're in the hands of a pro and they're selling you, you kind of go, damn, yeah, you're good. All right, let's go. Let's
trust,
right?
Confidence. Knowledgeable. I feel like we can keep going in this conversation. I'm not embarrassed to introduce you to other stakeholders.
Yeah.
All of that. Good points. Really good points.
I think about, and again, I talk about this on the podcast, that I did a lot of magic as a performer, over the years. And I remember being at it was some sort of real estate kind of convention kind of thing, but they had an MC who was an amateur comedian. Now, emphasis on the amateur. And every time he got up there, he'd try to make these jokes that were just falling flat. And everybody was just like, this is kind of before cringeworthy was really a term, but that's what was happening. And then I was like, oh my God, this is not good. Like, I got to go out there, after dinner and do my show. But going out there with confidence, and they just felt like they were in good hands. It's like, oh, take me, just like they just want to go with you. So that is what you're instilling in people in your keynotes and your trainings, is all that, for people just to be like, take me, like, whether it's sales and yeah.
And when you said something interesting, you take me, I feel comfortable with you. Yeah. Now I'm going to open up and listen to you. Yeah. I'm going to, and we'll get into some vulnerability, allow for candidness, all of that. When you instill that in somebody, when you evoke that emotion where people feel comfortable, you're acting like a pro. And people today expect pros when they're engaging. People are busy. Nobody has time to do anything. They don't have time to interact with people. So if you're going to interact with someone, you need to interact like a pro.
And I think that the bar is set so high now, Paul, in terms of let's just look at, the Amazon effect, of you get things
Good.
now
Good.
quickly,
I don't
frictionless.
need to talk to you. I can research it with the
Right,
Amazon effect.
right. So,
right.
so that idea that if you are going to connect with someone, you better make it worth their while, because there are so many other ways to purchase these days. They're just all of that. They're fed up, they're ready.
Can I piggyback on the word connect?
Yeah.
So this is the difference between good and great, Anders. This is the difference. So when people say connect, what we're finding and what I find is people don't really understand what that means. Fundamentally, they understand what it means to connect with somebody. They don't know how to do it though.
Mm.
And what is so popular now and what really resonates with people is learning how to connect with people, because people are dynamic, people are fluid, people are different. When they learn how to truly connect through words and phrases, that's when you go from good to great. That's when you go from maybe triple A. I'm going to use baseball. I know you're a hockey guy, but we'll go with triple A here. Oh, juniors. You go from juniors to the NHL.
Yeah.
And that connecting piece is really difficult. People don't know how to do it. They've never been trained. They've never been coached on it. They get what it means. They just don't know how to do it. So to me, that connecting piece is what absolutely separates an amateur from a pro.
Mm. And I think I see something happening, or I hear it as we're talking, before we started recording, the behind the scenes piece. You were talking about you in Winnipeg, and you were connecting with me before we even started, right? You were building trust and a bond between us, and now you've referenced hockey, Winnipeg for me, right? You are framing everything for me, right? And so I think for the listeners right now, they're actually hearing you at work in terms of building that connection. Would I be right in saying that?
You'd be 100% right, although I'm doing it subconsciously, but intentionally. So I shouldn't even say I'm actually doing it intentionally. And I've done research before I walked in to talk to you. So there is, yes, I am pivoting. So you're talking about pivoting to the person that you're talking to. There's some educational guesses here, of course, but I'm pivoting to you, Anders, to better connect with you so we can have a healthy, more productive dialogue.
And so now you said you did your research. Now, is that something that you teach or train in terms of people making that extra effort before, kind of like, almost like a pre-connection homework?
So I'm glad you brought this up. Depends on the experience level of the audience, will depend on how much I go in depth. But I'll tell you something that I say to people: don't be an amateur. Make sure you do research on people before you talk to them. Get on LinkedIn. Don't tell them you're going on Facebook. Don't tell them that you're going on their Instagram, but get to know them a little bit before you talk to them. Because when people talk to me and try to sell me something and try to engage with me and they don't know about me, it irks me. It irks me. So yes, I do get into that, not in depth, because there's a fundamental, when you talk about researching people before you speak, sometimes you get eye rolls. I do that. Do you really do that? I'll tell you who I'm finding. The younger generations need to do a better job of this when they're selling. Sometimes they're going through the mechanics. You would think through technology they'd be doing that. What I'm finding is a lot of them don't do a lot of research before they're talking to the person. They almost wing it. They're almost making it up as they go along. So depends on the generation, will depend on how much research people are doing. Talk about Generation X and the boomers. Yes, the boomers are still in the workforce. They know they get the importance of researching. The younger generations, the later millennials, now the Gen Zs, need to do more of that before they speak to people.
And do you think, like what you were just saying, when someone doesn't do research and they're talking to me, and I know they haven't done the research, automatically in my mind, I'm like, oh man, they're going to waste my time because of all these things they should have known before coming into this, right?
Correct. That depending on how you're built, depending on your underlying need, which I talk about in keynotes, depending on how you build will depend on how much that resonates. If you're one of 4 underlying needs and you pick one of the underlying needs, I'll give you the 4.
Yeah.
Need to be right, need to be liked, need to be safe, need to look good. If you're one of these 4, and you're not talking about did any research on that person, it's really going to irk them. You want to guess which one it is? Need to be liked, need to be right, need to be safe, need to look good. Which one do you think wants people to research them before you walk in the most?
Need to be right? Or
That would be number two. That would be number two. Very good guess, by the way. You got three left. It's either liked, safe, or look good.
Look good, then.
Wow, great guess, Anders.
Thanks for the hint. Thanks.
I love the Canadians. So depending, now you wouldn't know, you may know that through research on LinkedIn. Somebody does a lot of posts. They talk about themselves. They have pictures of themselves. They're not shy about themselves. You could start to glean somebody's underlying need just by the research you do. Again, it's not scientific, but it's educational guesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can almost see some of those overlapping a little bit, right? Too. It kind of like how people can be visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, but it's a mix of, those different learning styles.
And the underlying needs, you have different degrees of all four. That's exactly right. And as I'm talking to you, I'm trying to truly assess your underlying need. I think I got you pegged. I think. I'm not going to go there yet.
Okay. Yeah. There's going to be like a little bit of, I'm going to be crying. There's going to be quite.
No. You're fine. You're very nice, Andrew. You're very nice.
It's all good. So is that something, and you talk about, you talk about this in Connect Like a Pro, these underlying needs. Is that you're kind of running filters and just kind of, is that something that you have unconsciously, like you said, you're doing it unconsciously, but
and sometimes intentionally.
Okay. Oh, yeah. But you've ingrained it into yourself that as you meet someone, you're kind of running through those filters.
100. Anna's very astute. I mean that, very astute. I am constantly vetting, fleshing out, determining, discerning, gleaning. So if I want it to be healthy and productive, I'm trying to pivot to that underlying need. Yes, it's on a daily interaction. I'll give you an example. Walk into an elevator. When somebody's in an elevator and they're looking at you and they're smiling, they're one of the four. You know that automatically. If I said to you, they're one of the four, need to be liked, need to be safe, need to be right, need to look good, which one do you think is going to start smiling at people and have that jovial type of demeanor?
Probably to be liked.
Anders, again, 2 for 2 in Winnipeg. Good for you. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I would pivot to that. That means you're going to have to start to pivot words and phrases and your demeanor towards an underlying need. This is complicated. This doesn't happen overnight. But the better you're able to pivot to people, the better you connect, the better you have healthy, productive relationships, both professionally and personally. People are eating this up, Anders. They love it because they've never been taught how to do it. Now, this is not a personality profile. It's not Myers-Briggs. It's not Strength Finders. It's not DISC. This is an underlying need, how people take in information and they decide whether it motivates them and keeps them productive or whether it turns them off.
Yeah, it seems so much more direct than, because it's a need, as opposed to going into the personality assessments that you just talked about.
And those personality assessments are powerful. Yeah. This is a much more direct, easy to get your arms around, easy to embrace. Yeah. Once you start to understand it. That's exactly right.
Right. And that's a little bit more applicable, a little bit more useful in the field where we don't have to, go through all these questions or, trying to decipher.
So I would tell you it's really useful and really applicable. And it's people like, I had somebody in one of my audience recently say to me, Paul, thank you. I'm like, for what? Now I know why my husband is the way they are for the last 25 years. I've been trying to put my finger on it, and now I did it. Yeah. So this is in I'm sure you can appreciate this. I'm older than you are, but I'm sure you can appreciate this, that in the workforce today, people appreciate skills and concepts that not only impact their professional life, but also impact their personal life. And that's what this is, a life skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it is a life skill, isn't it so much more rewarding to learn that life skill and use that life skill, right? Sometimes if it's just work related, I got to learn this.
I can't use this. I can't use it at home. That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right. It's not transferable. That's right.
Right. And that also reminds me, back in high school, I just remember there's always people in we were in whatever class, and Mr. So-and-so, when are we ever going to use this in life? Right. Like that,
You mean with statistics and physics? I get it.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I aren't, you might be in magic. I'm not.
Right. Yeah. I actually have a physics degree, but again, I didn't really.
That's right.
My joke is
Are
that
you a
I had to
smarty
learn the
pants?
laws of
Are you
physics
a
to learn
smarty
how to
pants?
defy them. Sorry, what's
You're
that?
smart. You're really smart. Physics is
Yeah, but I forget so much of it now. So it's like I haven't used it. So, uh,
that's
you know,
fascinating.
Paul, let me ask you this. You talked about generational changes and not
Yeah.
doing enough research.
Yeah.
What else is changing out there in sales, in your opinion? Or maybe it is all just generational. And what do salespeople need to do to evolve to be able to deal with those changes?
So the one that I see the most and hear the most because of technology is people have become really rusty on real life skills like
Mm-hmm.
communication, like listening and questioning, like presentation skills. There's a rust factor because with technology, people have become lazy,
Mm-hmm.
complacent. And I will say this about the younger generation, they eat it up. They love it. They love it when you teach them real life skills like listening,
Mm-hmm.
questioning, and presentation skills. That's the
Yeah.
big miss right now. And companies are investing in it because they realize there's a gap right now.
Yeah. I totally agree with you. And it reminds me, like I have a 13-year-old daughter and, texting. And I'm like, get on the phone, like talk to people,
Oh no,
right?
phone no. They
Just
won't
to
do
be
it.
able to have that in the moment, real
You
time,
and I
hearing
would pick up the
tone.
phone. You and I would pick up the
I
phone, but
know,
they
but
won't do it. They won't do it.
well, she does. She is more
Okay,
and
good.
more, which is like, I'm kind
Good.
of like, oh, good. Like there's just so much more. Like when you think about people reading into the written words that don't have a much thought put into them as they were typed, right? And all of this humming and hawing of, oh, what does she mean, he mean, whatever. Like just, in real time, being able to converse with someone gives you so much more information and comfort, and confidence in talking. So,
Good point.
but
Really good point.
I do see those same, like you said, so those same weaknesses. We do a lot of, trainings for companies who are exhibiting at trade shows, and those interpersonal skills of
That's right.
being able to have interactions. It's kind of like, oh, and especially coming out of pandemic, there's people who've never been to a trade show before, so there's even that gap. But
And when you talk about the connecting piece, you have to communicate.
mm-hmm.
Now, you can still use the connecting piece on email and texting, things of that nature, but this causes people to, it's the verbal aspect to your point, not hiding behind the technology that really becomes a big differentiator. And there is starting to eat that up.
Yeah. Hiding behind the technology. I like that term that you said because there is something about, having, well, even virtual is a little bit different, right? We're not
I would
sharing the
argue,
same
though, I
air.
would argue
Even close.
you
Oh
can
yeah.
connect pretty
No,
well with people
it's,
virtually.
I mean, it's very close, right? It's not quite the same, right? But it's very close. But then yeah, your texts, your words, your emails, like sometimes people do what's easy instead of doing what's effective, right? And with that, how do we like stop hiding? And I think you mentioned vulnerability earlier. So can we let's kind of
Sure.
peel back those layers and talk
Sure.
about vulnerability and what that means in terms of connection, in terms of selling and that sort of thing.
So, and I don't, so sometimes when people hear vulnerability, like, do I have to get on a couch and have a
Yeah.
conversation about this? This is about, I want people to be candid. I want people to be vulnerable and I want people to be transparent when they communicate with people. That's the things that stick with people. In terms of the vulnerability, I want people to be more authentic
Mm,
and more open when they're talking to people, whether it's in negotiation, whether they're selling, whether they're in leadership. The vulnerability means that people feel like you're being yourself. People feel like you're being more often than not transparent with information. And it allows them to want to open up and potentially be vulnerable with you. And in turn, it feels like you're being vulnerable with them.
mhm. Yeah. The I find that there is a little bit of a uh, people professionalism, and we're talking about being a pro
Yeah.
and being authentic. Sometimes somehow that can be seen as two opposing poles, right? To be professional is to be buttoned up
Right.
and to be
Right.
I am Mr. Professional, right? And not being authentic, but they can coexist. Do you want to speak to that?
So I feel like, so I started working in the early 90s. And what you just said, 100%. The professionalism and the authenticity, sometimes they could bump up against each other, where if somebody thought they were being authentic, they thought they were being unprofessional.
Mm-hmm.
And let's I think the pendulum has completely swung the other way, a 180, where people in the workforce say expect you to be authentic. And that equals you being a pro when you're communicating. Otherwise, they feel like what you're saying to them is inauthentic, disingenuous. And sometimes they feel like I have to take a shower after having a conversation because it's not coming across.
Right.
So people are screaming for that authenticity.
Yeah. I mean, and this reminds me too of some places where they do bump into each other still, in the sense that, well, let's talk virtual, for example, just because we're
Sure.
both on a thing.
Sure.
I could have in my background, dirty clothes and things, like it could be a total mess back there. And I'm like, I'm being authentic. This is how I live.
So
Right.
this is
So
another great point.
yeah.
When you and I first came on camera, I'm like, oh, he's a pro. It's the first thing I
Right.
think. First, you have a stand-up desk, don't you? You're standing up right now, right? You have height
Yeah.
adjustable.
Yeah.
You got a nice clean background behind you. You look buttoned up. You look ready to go. You look like you've done this before. I'm assuming you've interviewed people in your career,
Mm-hmm.
and you're like, are you kidding me? Like, that's the background you chose, or that's what you're wearing today.
Right.
And I feel like there's a balancing out of act of authenticity and being a pro in what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're just somebody that looks like you just got out of bed. You don't care about what your background looks. I mean, I'm taking care of what I'm doing. I
Mm-hmm.
have more people say to me, "Wow, you look like you're taking this seriously." Yeah, I get paid to do this. First of all, yeah, my image, my brand is important to me. Maybe you should think about that. Not you, Anders,
Mm-hmm.
but in general.
Yeah. 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 It's that, well, not that balance, but it is this kind of thing. I think when we are when we present ourselves in a way that we want to be perceived, there shows that there's some effort there. And because of that effort, we attribute that professionalism. We attribute that kind of,
That's right.
like they want to be here. They're going to value me if they value themselves and how they show up. So I think there's a lot of things that can build trust, in those little details of how people show up.
I think the honeymoon from COVID is over. So when the virtual first began, all right, you cut people a break,
Mm-hmm.
screaming pets in the background, potentially kids in the background, what have you. I think that honeymoon has ended, and people, if you got to get on virtually, I mean, people are interviewing all the time virtually. That's the most
Yeah.
common way to interview. You need to, people are listening to this, and I'm sure they are because I know you have a huge following. Make sure you look and sound like a pro, whether it's virtual or in person.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's part of how we show up now, right? We gotta have your home set up, or wherever you're gonna,
That's right.
get that figured out. And then of course showing up in person, which is, thank goodness, back and
For
happening
sure.
out
There's a
there.
great balance. There's a great
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so, do you have any tips? I know you talk about a lot. You have a lot of expertise, but let's just touch on negotiations a little bit, because I feel
Sure.
like that's not a hidden part, but it doesn't get talked about enough. What are some tips for our listeners to, and I know it shouldn't be a confrontational thing. Maybe let's talk about that. How do you look at negotiations?
How does Paul look at negotiations?
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
it's not a
your
conflict. No, it's business. It's
yeah.
a, it's, I don't take negotiation personal at all, but I will tell you,
Mm,
depending on how you're built through an underlying need perspective,
mm,
can determine a lot of ways in how you feel about negotiation. So negotiate. Here's the hard part with negotiation. Most people are not trained, they're not coached, and they're not skilled on it, and or they look at it as conflict, to your point, and they shy away from it, or they're just not good at it. So I'm
mm,
telling you, from a negotiation perspective, you need to, if this is something that you do from a business perspective, first of all, this is a negotiation is a life skill. If this is something that you find yourself not being effective at, you need to, whether it's books, whether it's getting a coach for it, whether it's getting training, you need to hone that skill, because as people have said, and there's a famous quote, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And that is a
mm.
skill.
Yeah.
Mr. Karras, by the way.
Sorry, who was that? You said?
Karras
Oh,
negotiation.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, negotiations, everything's a negotiation when you look at it, right? Your kids negotiate with you all the time.
That's
There's
right.
all those opportunities
Significant
to
others.
practice those skills. Exactly.
That's
Where do
right.
you want to go eat tonight, right?
That's
That kind of
right.
thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's
Oh,
right.
that's
And then, by the way, being vulnerable in negotiation is a very powerful tool.
mhm.
Listen, and you've been in business for a long time. You've been very successful in what you're doing. You know that you have clients that like to negotiate, and you know of clients who don't.
Yeah.
You might say to
Certain
yourself, wow, that was
cultures, right, tend to negotiate more, right? And
right.
that's
US versus Canada.
yeah,
Could be. Could be. Could be.
yeah.
It can be an assertiveness, a lack of assertiveness.
Mhm.
People look at negotiation. Why do you have to negotiate? Because that's a skill that is expected in our culture.
Yeah.
In our culture, Andrews, for sure.
Yeah. Like, and sometimes I think about selling things on Facebook Marketplace, right? And I'm like, yeah, I want this much for it. I don't think about the people like, hey, would you offer this? And like, they're always like, making these offers, and you're like, I should have intentionally went a lot higher to get down to where I really wanted to be, and sometimes just want things to be more straightforward.
Like underlying these, there are also negotiation types.
Yeah.
Not personality types, that people have a different style when they negotiate. An analogy I like to talk about is the people that work for Walmart are probably some of the nicest human beings that you've ever met. They can be ruthless negotiators. It doesn't match their personality.
Right.
So there are different types. So really, from getting good at negotiation is you have to have an awareness of the aspect, the negotiation types. You have to understand how to negotiate price. You have to understand that there are tactics and strategies that people use, and how do you counter those strategies? I've had the fortunate experience to work with some global procurements of Fortune 500 companies, and they always wanted to bring me in to give the perspective of the person they're negotiating with. Like the vendors that they're negotiating with, give them their mindset. So it's fascinating. They're highly trained, by the way. Global procurement can be highly trained.
Yeah, we deal with that at our company too. And sometimes, like, man, they're like feels ruthless compared to the smaller companies, right? But
that's right. But remember, they're trained to ask.
Interest.
They're trained to ask, protecting the interest. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I always have the same question to procurement when somebody asks me a question. Where'd you come up with that? Like, how'd you come up with that information? And you see people stop dead in their tracks.
That's a great question to have in your back pocket for that.
Sure.
That's very cool. This has been a great time that we've spent.
You
here
ask great
together.
questions, Andrews. Yes, great questions.
I think also we're in alignment here. And of course, that's partly you being who you are in the moment for me, right? Which is a part of that part of the connection. I'm just kind of thinking of like, wow, this is just really, time has flown by because we're kind of singing from the same song sheet.
Good banter. Good banter.
Right. Yeah. So, how can people get a hold of you, Paul, in terms of if they want to reach out to you for trainings, keynotes, et cetera?
Sure. So my website is the Paul Bramson Companies, and that's BRAMSON, the Paul Bramson Companies, or paulbramson.com. And of course, on LinkedIn, I have my personal LinkedIn page, as well as my business LinkedIn page. Again, it's Paul Bramson, BRAMSON.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And I know that, I've got takeaways. I'm probably going to go back and make a few notes from this episode. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate the interview, Andrews. You did a nice job. All
right. Thanks, Paul. And to our listeners, thank you very much for joining us. And until next time, stay engaged. Thank you so much for listening to Engaging Personalities. If you believe this world needs more engagement and you're an industry leader or you have an interesting take on rehumanizing business, go to go.engagify.ai/podcast-guest to apply and come on the show. If you got something out of this interview, do you mind sharing it on your social media? Just grab a quick screenshot with your phone and text it to a friend or post it on the socials. If you know someone that would be a great guest, tag them on social media to let them know about the show. Include the hashtag Engaging Personalities. I love seeing your posts and guest suggestions. We are regularly putting out new episodes and content. To make sure you don't miss any episode, go ahead and subscribe. Your thumbs up, ratings, and reviews go a long way to help promote the show and mean a lot to me and my team. Want to know more? Go to our website, engageify.ai, or follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and stay engaged.